All right, let's dive into something truly foundational today. We're looking at the future of mining.
Yeah, an industry that, I mean, it literally underpins modern society.
Absolutely. But it's undergoing these incredible shifts. We're talking technology, global politics.
Even what it means to be a good neighbor in the 21st century, it's all changing.
Exactly. So today's deep dive, we're pulling directly from Chapter 27, looking ahead from a key industry text. It gives us a kind of roadmap to where things might be heading.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how this industry, often seen as, maybe slow to change, a bit resistant, is actually at this really pivotal crossroads.
Right.
So our mission today is really to extract those core insights, maybe some surprising facts about where mining is going, and crucially, why these changes matter to all of us.
Yeah, get ready for quite a journey. We'll be touching on everything from like autonomous trucks
hmm
to potential mining up in Greenland, the ripple effect of social media, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
And even this really bold vision for a zero footprint future for mining.
It's definitely far from just rocks and dirt these days.
So you might instinctively think of mining as, well, old school, right? Rooted in tradition.
Yeah, that's the common perception.
But our source, it jumps right in, reminds us it's constantly evolving. Now, it admits it's not given to what the text calls frivolous change.
Makes sense given the massive capital involved. You don't just switch things up lightly.
Exactly. But any proven technology that genuinely boosts productivity, it gets adopted remarkably fast.
That's absolutely right. And if we look at the trends that are already happening, we see a clear move towards more automation. Things like drilling, excavation, haulage equipment that's increasingly automated.
And renewables too, right? For
Yeah.
remote sites.
Yeah, a growing number of remote operations are turning to renewable energy.
Yeah.
But the true game changers are often those unpredictable technological advances. I mean, think about it. Just a decade ago, who would have really predicted this huge demand for lithium, graphite, certain rare earths like dysprosium?
It's like the periodic table is getting a whole new workout.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just as silicon became vital for computer chips, now you've got battery tech, new magnets. It's driving demand for all sorts of elements. Which leads us to ask, okay, what's next? Will something like scandium, which was once seen as relatively useless because it didn't have many applications, will that become a glamour metal now that new tech is finding uses for its properties?
Or could tin make a comeback? One of the oldest metals we've used.
Right. Or what about thorium for nuclear fission? The promise of less dangerous waste products. The core message is really clear. Wherever technology leads, mining has to follow. It's the ultimate supplier.
It's fascinating, though, how that efficiency drive can sometimes lead to these, well, counterintuitive results. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. This paradox where mines are getting bigger and better, but sometimes that actually means a shorter mine life. How does that work? How does that hyper-efficiency change the economics?
Well, it really comes down to economies of scale, especially in surface mines. We're seeing this huge trend where for some metals, maybe 90% of the world's production comes from just 5% of the mines.
Wow. That concentrated.
Very.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is driven by the sheer size of the haulage trucks. Think back to the early 70s. A 50-ton truck was massive then.
Right.
Today, 350-ton trucks are pretty common, and we're looking at 500-ton trucks not being far off.
An incredible scale.
And these lower bulk haulage costs, they do two main things. First, they make it economic to mine much lower grade deposits. So average copper ore grades today, often lower than what would have been considered the cutoff grade 40 years ago.
So they're mining less rich rock, basically.
Exactly. And second, it allows for much higher stripping ratios.
Yeah.
They can dig through way more waste rock to get to the valuable ore, even if it's deeper.
Okay.
And the really remarkable thing is, despite these lower grades and higher stripping ratios, the actual real-term cost of producing stuff like copper has generally declined over the last century because of these efficiencies.
So efficiency trumps or quality in a way.
To a large extent, yes. And it's fundamentally shifted mining away from underground high-grade stuff towards these massive open pits for lower-grade resources, like Australia's super pit near Kalgoorlie is a classic example.
Okay, so if these operations are getting so much bigger, so much more efficient, what does that do to the mine's lifespan? It seems odd, but you're saying higher production rates actually lead to a higher net present value.
That's the key, NPV.
Oh.
It means the project is worth more to investors if the money comes back faster.
So get in, get the resource out, get the return quickly.
Pretty much. And this means deposits that might once have been planned for, say, 25 years of mining are now being blasted through and completed in 10 years, maybe even less.
Which you have to assume has major social implications.
Oh, absolutely. That raises a really important question about the impact on local communities. Think about it. If production ramps up suddenly because of commodity prices or new tech or even, political instability making companies want to extract quickly,
Right. Get it while you can.
that can seriously disrupt long-term community planning, stability, employment, everything. So the core insight there is that efficiency, kind of counterintuitively, isn't always about making things last longer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about maximizing that immediate financial return, which totally reshapes the mine's relationship with the community around it.
And that trend towards massive scale, it also means fewer, very large companies can actually afford these multi-billion-dollar mega projects.
Definitely takes deep pockets.
But let's not forget the junior companies. You mentioned them earlier. It sounds like they play a very different but still vital role in this whole ecosystem.
They absolutely do. It's quite a contrast, really. The large companies, they're financially strong, which means they're very unlikely to just walk away from environmental obligations, even if a mine closes early.
More stability there.
Right. And they lead the way in R&D, training. They often set industry examples. In developing countries, they can even act as sort of flag bearers for their home nations, bringing in suppliers and services.
Okay, so that's the majors. What about the juniors?
The juniors are more entrepreneurial, generally less risk-averse. They're often the ones exploring in areas the majors might avoid. They find those greenfield resources totally new deposits.
The pioneers, in a way.
You can say that. And they could often profitably run smaller projects that just don't meet the scale criteria for the big guys. They've really dominated greenfield exploration recently.
But there's a downside risk, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned risky.
There is. Junior companies have limited financial resources. They're often tightly controlled by their lenders. So there's a very real risk of bankruptcy, and that can lead to orphan sites, abandoned mines,
Oh.
which unfortunately are pretty widespread in places like the U.S. and Canada. It really highlights why feasibility studies need to show robust profitability to get approved in the first place to try and prevent that.
And environmentally, how do they stack up?
It's a real spectrum. Some juniors are actually at the forefront doing innovative environmental work, adapting well locally, but others, well, particularly during recent booms, like the coal and lateritic nickel boom in Indonesia the source mentions, some caused serious and widespread environmental damage. Basically, little or no attention to environmental issues. And interestingly, the source notes that even NGOs were nowhere to be seen in some of those cases. So it varies wildly.
Okay, so we've covered the huge shifts in the tools, the scale. Let's pivot now to the human element. The relationships between companies, communities, governments. That seems to be transforming just as profoundly.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. It's truly not your granddad's mining anymore.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, the source talks about an end to paternalism.
Yeah.
That old idea that companies knew best, that what's good for them is good for the community. That's largely gone.
So more negotiation.
Genuine negotiation, yeah. Land acquisition, benefit sharing. Local community consent is now seen as equally important to government approvals. Major companies, they rarely proceed without it now.
That's a big shift.
It is. And there was also this kind of environmental paternalism. Sometimes expats thinking only Western ways were best practice, maybe ignoring useful local knowledge. That's also fading.
Interesting. What about NGOs in this picture?
Well, you'd think they'd always champion local voices, right?
Yeah.
But the source points out that some international NGOs can also exhibit paternalistic attitudes. The we know what's best for you approach, sometimes embracing particular disgruntled groups without fully checking broader community views. And interestingly, there's apparently an emerging anti-NGO backlash in some places, people seeking more accountability from them too. So that dynamic is also evolving.
So with this end to paternalism, what does it mean for the actual rule makers, the regulators? Are we seeing different government approaches globally?
Oh, absolutely. Really different approaches. In democracies, regulations tend to reflect public perception more closely. So if there are big concerns about pollution, you'll likely see stricter rules.
Makes sense.
But in less democratic countries, the regulations might not align so well with what the community actually wants or thinks. That creates complex challenges for companies operating there.
And does experience matter, like countries with a long history of mining versus newer ones?
Definitely. In places with long mining histories like Australia, environmental regulation is quite mature now. It's become pretty routine. And industry self-regulation, like the Minerals Council of Australia Code, often goes beyond the legal minimums.
Right.
But contrast that with countries with shorter histories, like Indonesia maybe. There, regulations are still evolving. Sometimes you see these stick and carrot approaches, like their proper system, which publicly rates companies on environmental performance.
Interesting. Like a public scorecard.
Kind of, yeah. And then you have places where there were major past catastrophes, like the Philippines. There, public outrage can still be really high, even for minor incidents. And it's often fueled by strong anti-mining lobbies. Very difficult operating environment.
You also mentioned a hurdle, especially in developing countries, called government capacity. What does that entail?
Yeah, that's a really significant and complex challenge. It often means there's just a lack of trained people, maybe not enough experience, funds, or even the right equipment.
For what?
Evaluating projects.
Exactly. Evaluating these highly technical proposals and then supervising the ongoing operations effectively. This can lead to big delays during the approval stage because regulators are trying to grapple with complex information, often under pressure from both the company and opposition groups. So what's the solution?
Well, the source suggests the industry itself actually has a vital role to play here in building that capacity. Through cooperation, assistance, maybe seconding experienced staff to government agencies, setting up exchange programs, things like that.
So partnership, not just ticking boxes.
Precisely. The insight is that real progress needs that kind of partnership in these evolving regulatory landscapes, not just basic compliance.
But even with all these changes, you hear about mining struggling with public perception. And you mentioned visibility as a huge factor.
Yeah, it's a core issue. That negative perception often overlooks just how critical mining is economically, how necessary the materials are.
And climate change concerns probably add fuel to that fire.
Absolutely, especially anything linked to coal.
Mm-hmm.
But the visibility factor itself is huge. Modern mines are just vastly larger,
Right.
way more visible than old historical operations. They leave this permanent legacy on the landscape.
Even if technically sound, the visual is powerful.
Extremely powerful. That sheer visual impact, whether it's steam from a stack or wind turbines appearing in a rural area, it often causes public outrage, even if the actual environmental damage or risk is minimal.
It's an emotional reaction to seeing the environment change,
Exactly, it's visceral.
which leads to a pretty radical idea mentioned in the source. Can mining operations ever truly become invisible after they're done?
Yeah, it proposes this strategy called zero residual footprint.
Zero footprint. What does that actually mean?
The goal is total rehabilitation of the affected land, completely eliminating those final voids, the big permanent pits left by open pit mining.
Is that even possible?
Well, it's already basically achieved by underground mines, by mineral sands operations, and shallow open cast mines like bauxite or lateritic nickel. They often backfill as they go.
Okay, so it can be done in some cases.
Yes. And the source even suggests that coal strip mines could modify how they place their waste rock, their spoil, to eliminate final voids without enormous financial detriment.
There's always a but.
The huge challenge is that forcing this on existing large open pits would effectively bankrupt them
Why?
because they supply most of the world's copper, iron ore, lignite coal. The cost of backfilling those massive existing pits would be astronomical.
So you'd need to grandfather existing mines, let them finish under current rules.
Exactly. It would have to apply only to new projects.
What would the consequences be for future mining?
Pretty significant. Some deposits, maybe certain types of lignite, might just not get mined at all. Others might only be partially mined. Or mining methods would have to shift, maybe more underground block caving for things like copper porphyries instead of open pits.
And costs.
Initially, costs for commodities like copper, gold, iron ore would likely go up. But the idea is that costs would probably come down over time as new, cheaper backfilling technologies are developed.
So it's a massive shift in thinking.
Truly transformative. And the source stresses this would require overwhelming acceptance from the whole industry, plus universal, worldwide regulatory support. No exceptions allowed. And everyone would have to agree on what acceptable rehabilitation actually looks like.
It's a colossal undertaking just to think about implementing it globally.
Absolutely. A huge vision.
Okay, that's a fascinating potential future. But let's pull back to the biggest picture now. We've established mining is operating in tough physical environments, but also in this increasingly complex, multipolar global economy. What does multipolar actually mean for how mining companies have to operate day to day?
Fundamentally, it means that old, simple, bipolar world, dominated by the West, is gone. You've got massive wealth, massive influence now coming from traditional OECD nations, yes, but also China, India, other rising nations.
Developing economies aren't just recipients anymore.
Exactly. They're active shapers on the global stage. And this shift means investors from all these different nations, different cultures, they often play to different rules, which really challenges those traditional Western business assumptions.
How so? What are the key areas of change?
Well, the source points to 5 key spheres of competition and change. First is winning talent, professional talent, intellectual talent. It's now a fiercely competitive global resource.
Give me an example.
Okay, Filipino mining professionals. Apparently, they're now quite rare in the Philippines because international demand is so high. Companies worldwide are competing for the best people, driving up costs, needing new ways to keep them.
Right. What's second?
Sources of capital. Foreign investment isn't just flowing from developed countries anymore. You've got huge investment from developing economies into others. China's investment in Indonesian mining is a prime example. That changes who holds the purse strings and what their priorities might be.
Okay. Talent, capital.
Third, the battle for resources itself. The developing world is increasingly competing for the actual commodities, shifting supply and demand.
Fourth.
Emerging consumers. These new economic powerhouses mean new supply chains, new preferred locations for processing or decentralizing manufacturing.
And finally.
A new map of global innovation. These emerging economies are catching up fast in technical innovation. R&D leadership isn't just confined to the traditional hubs anymore.
So the takeaway is?
The overarching insight is that mining companies just can't operate with a single Western-centric mindset anymore. Success depends on navigating this complex global chessboard. With diverse players, diverse rules, it demands entirely new corporate skills.
That multipolar world sounds incredibly dynamic, sure, but also way more complex. How does that translate into geopolitical risk, especially in unstable regions?
Oh, it definitely ramps up the challenges.
Yeah.
Operating in unstable countries, post-conflict zones, maybe failing states, dealing with terrorism, constantly shifting political alliances.
Yeah.
It's all much harder now.
So how do companies respond? What are the practical strategies?
They have to adopt these really proactive, flexible strategies. Things like rigorous good corporate governance, making sure they align with principles from the World Bank, the OECD, to minimize risks.
Okay, governance is key.
And increasingly sophisticated political risk management. Moving beyond just buying insurance to having really holistic, proactive approaches to understanding and mitigating those risks.
Like what?
Well, applying comprehensive enterprise risk strategies across the whole business, and also actively supporting technical assistance programs in some cases to actually help stabilize the regions where they operate.
Interesting. So they're becoming development actors too, almost.
In a way, yes. The critical insight here is that mining is now right at the forefront of these broader development and risk issues. Companies have to assess if a project is viable not just commercially, but considering all these complex external risks as part of their core strategy.
Okay, let's shift to something sensitive but, well, unavoidable in international business: transparency and corruption. The source calls it a huge drawback. Is it getting worse or just more complex in this dispersed global environment?
It's certainly described as a huge drawback, yeah. And the dispersed nature of operations makes it more complex. Plus, there's often this gap between government policy on corruption and what actually happens on the ground.
And there's more scrutiny now, right?
Definitely. External pressure from NGOs like Transparency International, from watchdog agencies, they're monitoring and reporting much more. And that leads to more stringent operational requirements for companies. Things like the OECD anti-bribery laws, the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI.
So the rules are tightening, but what about that clash you mentioned earlier between Western definitions and local norms?
That's the real dilemma.
Yeah.
Navigating situations where Western culture might define something as a bribe, say a small facilitation payment to speed up paperwork, or an honorarium for a review committee member. But in the local context, it might be considered a locally normative value, just standard practice, maybe even expected.
Tricky territory.
Very. And looking ahead, companies have to absorb the costs of all this. New corporate governance requirements, international policing for bribery, much more due diligence, detailed records of all overseas payments.
Guarding against reputational risk, too, I imagine.
It's hugely important. Plus, increased disclosure of payments to governments, officials, even charities, and growing pressure on using tax havens.
So what's the best defense?
According to the source. Simple, transparency and openness. And having well-documented and well-communicated procedures for everything, it requires deep cultural understanding and very clear internal rules.
It sounds like a lot of these new standards, these requirements, are being pushed from the outside. You mentioned NGOs, regulators. Who else is driving this?
Well, a lot of it comes down to who holds the purse strings, the financial institutions.
Ah, the lenders.
Exactly. Yes, international agencies like the WTO, the World Bank, industry groups, they create leading practice guidelines. That's important. But it's also the global lending institutions, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, big private commercial banks. They are really driving accountability.
How?
A key example given is the Equator Principles, which started back in 2003. It's basically a benchmark used by the financial industry itself, private banks adopting it to assess and manage social and environmental risks when they finance projects. And it's explicitly linked to those IFC and World Bank guidelines.
So if you want the loan, you play by these stricter rules.
Pretty much. Now, the source adds a crucial point here. While these efforts are obviously laudable, pushing for better practice, they can sometimes lead to what it calls overkill,
Overkill, meaning?
demanding substantial efforts from the companies proposing projects, significantly increasing development time, which could potentially kill off an otherwise good, well-conceived project.
A balancing act, then.
Always. And it includes an important reminder. Mining's fundamental purpose is still to provide those essential mineral resources at affordable prices. Affordable both in money terms and environmental terms. Finding that balance is key.
Yeah, if we connect all these threads, it's really clear the industry is navigating a future where just being good enough isn't going to cut it anymore.
Not at all.
The bar for performance across everything, tech, environment, social, governance, it's just continually being raised.
Absolutely. And the industry has learned significantly from past challenges. You just need to look back at something like the OK Teddy disaster.
Right. Huge environmental and social fallout there.
Exactly. Where immense economic pressures led to just devastating consequences.
Yeah.
The industry, particularly the major players, has moved beyond just trying to understand and mitigate harm. Now the goal, increasingly, is to proactively generate positive environmental, social, and even microeconomic benefits in the areas where they operate. It's a profound shift in mindset.
And it's important to remember, mining has been absolutely fundamental to human civilization. Still is. It's the essential foundation of our modern society.
Couldn't live without it, literally.
And despite those undeniable environmental impacts, the progress made in recent decades, especially by responsible companies, is pretty notable. Performance often does exceed just the bare legal requirements now.
Which brings us to, I think, a really important final question for all of us to consider.
Yeah.
As the world's demand for minerals keeps soaring, and it shows no sign of stopping, how will we, as a global society, make sure that this pursuit of essential raw materials always prioritizes more than just compliance? Meaning, how do we ensure the equitable sharing of the benefits that come from mining? And how do we guarantee the creation of a net positive impact for the communities and the environments where these resources are actually found?
That's the big challenge, isn't it? Moving beyond do no harm to actually do good.
Precisely.
Definitely something to mull over as you go about your day. Maybe notice all the mineral products around you, all these complex global forces we've been talking about. That's our deep dive for today. Thank you so much for joining us.